All political power comes from the barrel of a gun. The Communist Party must command all the guns. That way, no guns can ever be used to command the party. Chairman Mao. This is AllMinucOne. My name is Bill. Please, if you like my content, consider hitting that like button, sharing, or subscribing. Help my channel grow so the word can get out, so this important information that I share with you may be spread amongst the populace. If you all are interested in a live show, I do one every Wednesday at 7 p.m. over on DLive. That is 7 p.m. Eastern. It's called TheEnds Justify the Memes. You can find us on DLive at ends_justify_memes. If you don't make that, we have a replays channel, TheEnds Justify the Memes, over on YouTube. Last week we had TheEnds. Tonight it's just going to be me and my co-host Tank talking about whatever we feel like talking about. It's kind of a loose show, guys, but we try to have fun and talk about important stuff. Also, consider going over to Subscribestar. If you'd like to help me out, help my family out while I make these videos, please. Right now I have no tiers. But if people start subscribing to this, I will set up tiers and I will make very specific content just for you. So let's get back to the matter at hand. And this is communism and Mao's Little Red Book. Now, Mao had one thing right in this quote, and that is all political power does come from the barrel of a gun. That's why if we are going to have power in the hands of the people must be able to possess guns. They must be able to have arms, and not just arms that certain politicians like or don't like, but all arms that are potentially equivalent to military arms, because that is the point. Our founding fathers had a good understanding of history and saw what happened to them from the British, as well as things that happened elsewhere in the history. And they knew that standing armies were not good for the American colonies. And what we are seeing now, and part of this defund the police movement and everything else, is that we've had a over-militarized police. We've had this drug war. And so there has been a lot of issues with that, as well as we've had this globalist, imperialistic expansion with our standing army that is technically unconstitutional. So the point of all this is that if the individual would take that responsibility on for themselves, and if someone were to invade the U.S., as in the past it was intended that the militia, that the locals would be trained by themselves locally and have access to arms, military arms, so that if someone were to invade, we would protect ourselves, then we wouldn't have these tyrannical governments. We wouldn't have this government with all this power as we do today. Now, I'm not against police people. Sheriffs were in effect back in those days. I just believe that we do need to police our communities better. And I think we shouldn't defund the police, but we should up their money. But I digress, because that's not what this conversation's about. It's about radicals and Marxists. And with that, I want to bring you to Saul Alinsky. Now, Saul Alinsky wrote a very popular book called Rules for Radicals, and this is very much the progressive playbook, at least here in the West. So here is an interview from CBS in 1966. I'm just going to play a very brief excerpt of this. And it says, "I'd organize hell."
His name is Saul Alinsky, and there are still many to whom the name is meaningless. But to millions now, he is looked on as a savior. And these are the so-called have-nots, the culturally deprived, the abject poor. They love him, and they ask him in to organize their weakness into a strength and power that has become a frightening threat to the establishment.
I suppose, given a choice, I think I would pick hell. The reason I'd pick hell is because that's where all the have-nots are.
He is disarmingly mild when you meet him. But there is an implacable ferocity about him which is directed at many forces he considers to be at the root of human suffering and misery.
I'm all for it. I think our Air Force and our Army should, after they finish in Vietnam, should come back and bomb the hell out of Mississippi, you know. what would it be, southern Mississippi instead of northern Mississippi. So we can all get freedom and equality down there, too.
He has called the war on
The barrel of the gun, people. The barrel of a gun.
poverty political pornography, and says those who run the program represent the greatest feeding trough that has come along for the welfare industry in years. There are always repercussions whenever Saul Alinsky moves into an afflicted ghetto with his industrial area's foundation, perhaps because it is felt he may get some results quicker than the established authorities, whom he ridicules for their boondogling. He can be scornful of an entire city with one scathing comment.
If you ask me one thing which Los Angeles really needed above anything else, I would say what it needs is a massive enema.
He is one of the few men who appears to be absolutely fearless, especially when it comes to the constant threats he receives by telephone and in the mail.
Death threats, I'll probably get knocked off. I think with all this notoriety and all this stuff that goes up, that there's always some kooky crackpot who will say, I'll get national headlines if I knock him off, which he will,
This, then, is an opening frame that we put around the self-portrait of one of the most controversial figures in today's gallery of American radicals. On this KPIX report, Saul Alinsky will share with you his searching, personal assessment of himself, as he did with us in this exclusive half-hour titled, I'd Organize Hell. My name is Jack Bunzel. We'll journey to Carmel, California to meet Saul Alinsky in just a few moments.
There is no nice way of getting things changed. And it's time that a good part of our country began to wake up and live in the world as it is, rather than the world as we would like it to be.
Now, that was 1966. Obviously, we had a grand cultural revolution around that time that were led largely by Marxists. And most of these Marxists as well were, of course, into the drug culture, alternative type religion, and anti-war, but they weren't necessarily anti-violence. There was a lot of strange stuff at the time, a lot of strange contradictions. That's usually how it goes with progressives. So, very briefly, I do want to go over his famous rules for radicals. And then I want to segue over into Mao. So, rule number 1, power is not only what you have, but what an opponent thinks you have. This is important. If your organization is small, hide your numbers in the dark and raise a din that will make everyone think you have many more people than you do. This tactic right here is exactly what BLM and Antifa are doing. And again, so Antifa says they claim they're anti-fascist, but they act just like fascists. We can get into what fascism is. I've done a video on that a little while back. I may, revamp that video or expound on that some more in the future. But essentially, it's progressivism. It's just nationalistic progressivism. It is with a slightly freer market than what you might consider socialism, but it's still centrally controlled. I will compare them generally to communist China. Communist China is a fascistic regime in every respects from everything that I'm aware of and know about of how they operate. And interestingly, the fascist and the communist are always fighting about who has power. No one who is liberty-minded, constitutionally minded, a federalist, a minarchist, any of those things are fascist. But according to the progressives, everyone who is against them is a fascist. That is part of their tactics here. So they are much smaller. I read from you the hidden tribes, that it's about 8% of the population. 8% can do a lot. Remember, the American Revolution was not much more than that amount of people. Rule number 2, never go outside the experience of your people. The result is confusion, fear, and retreat. Meaning, essentially, allow these people to have their little mantras. Allow these people to have have their woes, have their worries. Don't allow them to be exposed to things and ideas that may influence them away from the ideas that you are trying to present to them. See, this is that James Lindsay wokeness is a cult type idea. Heather Penrose talks about this, of course. Carlin Borisenko, many people who are very educated who understand. Some of them were once in it. Whenever possible, go outside the experience of an opponent. Here you want to cause confusion, fear, and retreat. Now, this is a tactic. Typically on the left, they will go, hey, well, what about this? They'll point to this for me, point to that. And they will try to get you in a little gotcha moment. They'll try to say something to you in a way that makes you think and pauses your mind and goes, let me think about that. And that's okay. It's okay to think about something. But when you do that, to them, they pounce because they see that as a sign of weakness. Because for them, everything's a mantra. Literally, remember that. Everything is memorized in a mantra and just something they go to. They've never put really any thought into it. That is, again, rule number 2. You don't have any thoughts into it. You just express those emotional appeals. Those emotional appeals are what is meant to capture you. And if you start to get into logic, that's confusing. Can't do that. Can't think things through. So they will use that opposite tactic again to hurt you, to make you stutter, to make you stammer, and to say, see, right there, you're wrong. If you were right, you would be passionate just like me, and you'd have an answer. And of course, that's nonsense. But they're not trying to have an actual real debate either. So number 4, make opponents live up to their own book of rules. You can kill them with this. For they can no more obey their own rules than the Christian church can live up to Christianity. Now, Christians can live up to Christianity. I think there have been Christians that have done so. I think most of us will fail. But that's not the point. This is the idea that those of us who are liberty-minded, constitutionalist, believe in free speech. And they do not believe in free speech and wish to weaponize free speech. So if you believe in free speech and you're principled, they know that you won't go against your principle by restricting their free speech. And so this puts us at a disadvantage if you are a principled individual. And I generally suggest that you remain a principled individual. However, there are times where rights, as we would call them, are not applied, again, constitutionally. And that is when someone is convicted of a crime. Once they are indicted and prosecuted and convicted, found guilty, they lose their rights. This has always been a thing in the United States. And I don't completely agree with it, but I understand it. I think that there needs to be a road and a path to redemption. So Maji Nawaz, for instance, went to prison. He was a Muslim radical, an Islamist. He was a terrorist. And he reformed himself. And I think he is an honest and legitimate man and thinker now. But the point of all of that is this, is that those who wish to destroy what we hold dear and fundamental, perhaps we should fight back against. Now, this is something I'm working through myself now currently, because in my first century metaphysic Christian beliefs, I believe in pacifism. Although in the past, I have been trained to be at least defensive or an aggressor. I mean, for lack of better terms, I was a Marine infantryman. I was trained to be, a killer, a murderer. And you may say war is different, but killing is killing. It is no light matter. So I've come to this point in my life where I need to be pacifistic, but I also have this other side of me that leans towards not necessarily retaliation, but at least self-defense. So again, they use this against us. This is very much what they've done to Christians in general with their altruism. And again, they make the emotional appeals toward people This idea of a social gospel, which, by the way, does not exist in the Bible. People will twist scriptures to make it so, but no Christian believed that for the first 4 centuries of Christianity. So unless you can show me within the first 4 centuries of Christianity that existed, it's not in the Bible. It just isn't. You can reconstruct the entire New Testament out of the writings of the early church fathers from the first 4 centuries of Christianity. In any case, rule number 5, ridicule is man's most potent weapon. It's hard to counterattack ridicule. It infuriates the opposition, which then reacts to your advantage. Again, about getting that reaction. You are a racist. You're a bigot. You're a sexist. You're a homophobe. Nyah, 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 nyah. All that stuff, right? This is where you just go, shut up, you idiot. Don't engage people. Or you just be like, well, I think you're a pedophile. And some of them are. So, that's what that's about, though. Again, to throw you off guard and to make you constantly react, to not actually be able to debate with them, to get this emotional reaction. When you go emotional, your brain shuts down and you are no longer processing things at a higher cognitive level. A good tactic is one your people enjoy. If your people aren't having a ball doing it, there is something very wrong with the tactic. Meaning, make it fun for them. This is why you see a bunch of degenerates in the streets, like the Chaz, or any of these other things that they seem like, oh, we're having the best good old time. Most of them, of course, are horrible, miserable people. And I feel bad for them. I mean, I honestly do. I jest about it just because, well, let's put it this way. People laugh for 2 reasons. There are 2 reasons why people laugh. One, because there's a laughter of joy. This laughter of joy comes from just pure joy, like watching a small child and things that they do, and that makes your day just light up. Or just being totally in love with somebody and just being giggly, that kind of thing. So there's laughter of joy, and then there's laughter of sadness. And it's because things are so dark and so horrible that we have no other means to respond to it unless we were to just break down and cry. So instead we laugh. There's this great illustration in Robert Heinlein's book, A Stranger in a Strange Land, where the main character doesn't understand why human beings laugh. And he finally sees this monkey in a zoo, and he has a banana, and this bigger monkey hits him over the head and takes the banana. And then this other monkey who's bigger, hits the other monkey over the head and takes his banana. And finally, Michael, the main character, starts laughing. And he tells his mentor, Jubal, that I finally get why human beings laugh. He says, it's because it hurts so bad you can't do anything else. Now, Heinlein's illustration, I don't know, is necessarily the best, but it is a novel, and the reality is that is the truth of it. This is why dark satirical humor is funny. If you ever worked in, say, law enforcement, the military, or EMS, or like in a hospital, like places that I've done, things that I've done in my life, you will find that the humor is very, very, very dark. And it's because you're constantly dealing and struggling with very hard situations, very difficult situations with very difficult people, with life or death situations. So anyways, rule number 7, a tactic that drags on for too long becomes a drag. Commitment may become ritualistic as people turn to other issues. This is ultra important. This is why they have no consistent principles and are constantly hypocritical. And I don't mean, look, you're not a hypocrite because you changed your mind legitimately. You're a hypocrite when you pretend. That's what that word means. It means you're an actor. It means you're pretending and you're putting on a show for other people that you're not being authentic and genuine. When Jesus called the Pharisees and the Sadducees hypocrites, that's what he was saying. He was saying, you hypocrites, you actors, you fakes, you phonies, you pretend to put on the show, but in reality, you are just, greedy scumbags who are torments to the people. Think about, read the Bible, read the New Testament, read the Gospels, what Jesus said about those people, and then think about the people in power in our government right now and what they do. And again, on both sides of that party spectrum. And I'm not saying there aren't good people on either side. There certainly are, but it's becoming increasingly worse as the years go. I have some faith and hope in the Republican Party right now, not just because of Trump, but because I've seen a lot of the old heads of the GOP, a lot of the neocons, essentially disappear. So, Rule 8, keep the pressure on. Use different tactics and actions, and use all events of the period for your purpose. Manipulation, right? Gaslighting, all that stuff. The major premise for tactics is the development of operations that will maintain a constant pressure upon the opposition. It is this that will cause the opposition to react to your advantage. I thought about bringing up Sun Tzu's Art of War today in this topic. It's a pretty good read. It's very small, very condensed. I might have a copy of it right over there. But anyways, in any case, this is very much from the Art of War. Constantly change your tactics. This makes your opponent constantly have to adapt. So psychologically, if you're confronted with an issue or a problem and you're reacting, you're always on the back end of things, and you're always going to be in a state of essentially unease, almost fear, if you would, because you have to constantly adapt, and that stress overwhelms you, and eventually you begin to shut down your higher levels of cognitive processing. On the other hand, if you are proactive, if you engage on a level that seeks out the problem first, or if you make the decision of, consciously make the decision to react the way you are going to react. This is called preparation, people. This is what training is for. This is not just physical training, but mental training. And I would also say spiritual training, your attitudinal self, right? This is very, very important to understand. This is one of the things that I hated. This is a huge sign of poor leadership, but I hated working under many people that I worked for over the years. Now, every good leader I ever had was always proactive, and every poor leader I always had was always reactive. Reactive thinking is the worst, and you will never go anywhere, and things will be so slow to change. And in part, this is what the so-called conservatives have done for decades, which is why the progressives, the Marxists, the communists, the socialists, whatever you want to call them, the globalists, they have always maintained this power, at least for the last 60 years, and actually further back. It really goes back to Woodrow Wilson, and then really FDR in those days. But they've certainly consolidated it since the 60s, since that Cultural Revolution, since Alinsky's time period. The threat is more terrifying than the thing itself. When Alinsky leaked words that large numbers of poor people were going to tie up the washrooms of the O'Hare Airport, Chicago City authorities quickly agreed to act on a long-standing commitment to a ghetto organization. They imagined the mayhem as thousands of passengers poured off airplanes to discover every washroom occupied. Then they imagined the international embarrassment and the damages to the city's reputation. The threat is more terrifying. This is reality. People are generally more terrified of pain and the potential of painful consequences than death itself. Because death is way too abstract, but pain is not. Pain is very tangible, and it is a huge psychological motivator. And I don't just mean physical pain, I mean emotional pain as well. This is why people don't like to hear the truth. They avoid the truth and they lie to themselves because they don't want to deal with the pain of their own psyches. That makes you a weak person. You are a weak person bringing down society by acting that way. And it's immature and childish. You need to grow up. Rule number 10. The price of a successful attack is a constructive alternative. Avoid being trapped by an opponent or an interviewer who says, okay, what would you do? Never present solutions, only problems. That's what this is. Only problems, no solutions. Rule 11, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, polarize it. Don't try to attack abstract corporations or bureaucracies. Identify a responsible individual. Ignore attempts to shift or spread the blame. Orange man bad. Orange man bad. Doesn't matter that we've had power for 40, 50 years in the United States on the federal government side. Immense power. Built coalitions. Had passed numerous laws. Expanded our global expansion. Got more ties into global trade organizations. Whatever else. Does not matter. Billionaire comes along who's kind of a jerk. Doesn't like any of this stuff. Shakes it up. Everything's his fault. Everything in the past 40, 50, 60 years is his fault. That's what this tactic is. And right here, according to Alinsky, the main job of an organizer is to bait an opponent into reacting. The enemy properly goaded and guided in his reaction will be your major strength. Do you understand now how they get you to chase your tail? So moving on, let's talk about Mao. This is from The Guardian. This was a few years back, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it says more than 6 years ago. Mao's Little Red Book gets revamped. New version of quotations from Chairman Mao's, the world's second most published book, that hit Chinese shelves in November. So this was September 2013. Now, kind of the importance of this is because, as China goes, they like to rewrite their history often as communism goes, as fascism, as progressivism goes. Rewrite history. So let's look at the Little Red Book. Now, you can get this. You can find PDFs. You can find just excerpts. It's just a bunch of quotes from Mao about things. But this is 143 pages long, so I cannot go through everything here, people. Not if you want to get through this video in any sort of amount of expedient time. So here, however, is the table of contents. So he has the Communist Party, what that is, class struggle, socialism and communism, the correct handling of contradiction among the people, war and peace, imperialism, and all reactionaries are paper tigers, dare to struggle and dare to win, the people's war, etc., etc., etc. It gets down here to women, culture, art, and study. So I'm just going to pick up a few of these and just read the first few things, and we're just going to talk about them. So here, class and class struggle. This is the typical Marxian notion that is completely obtuse and simplified view of history. Class struggle. Some class triumph. Others are eliminated. Such is history. Such is the theory of civilization for thousands of years. To interpret history from this viewpoint is historical materialism. Standing in opposition to this viewpoint is historical idealism. No, it's not idealism in any way, shape, or form. It's just reality. There's a reality to the world, people. It's far more complicated than the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. It's far more complicated than that. I can tell you that because human society is far more complicated. I can tell you that because there have been numerous societies within the world. This is like saying, the patriarchy! The patriarchy is just hierarchy, and there's a reason why we have that hierarchy. It's because it's embedded within our DNA. It's within our very nature. The very nature that these progressives want to ignore. In class society, everyone lives as a member of a particular class, and every kind of thinking, without exception, is stamped with a brand of class. Now, here's a problem, though. Within a communist society, there's only two classes. There's kind of 3, because if you're in the military, you're in that 3rd class. So we can go back to Plato's Republic and just look at it that way, right? He has the guardians, he has basically the police military class, and then he has everybody else. And that's the majority. Those are the lowly workers. Those are the people that are essentially the slaves of the military, and really that guardian class. And you're not going to get away from hierarchies. It's just not going to happen. They're in every animal society. Insects have hierarchies. Look at a beehive. They have a hierarchy. Changes in society are due chiefly to development of internal contradictions in society. That is, the contradiction between productive forces and the relations of production. The contradiction between classes and the contradiction between old and new. And the development of these contradictions that pushes society. Blah, 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 blah. The ruthless economic exploitation and political oppression of the peasants by the landlord classes forced them into numerous uprisings against its rulers. Yes, sort of. I mean, when you have totalitarian rule, when you have someone hoarding all of the wealth, you will get uprisings. That's not what happens in the U.S. That is a false dichotomy. That's a false narrative. It doesn't happen in the U.S. In fact, you are very likely to move up into at least the 3rd or 4th quintile at some point in your life. Most people just start off poor because you don't have anything when you're young. But your family built wealth, at least to some degree. And a lot of people that never did build wealth, it wasn't because the man kept them down. It's because you never tried or you made poor decisions. And I know I've made a lot of poor decisions in my life, people. I'm not sitting here preaching to you like some, person on the mountain up high who is completely detached from the reality of the world. I've never been more than a lower middle class individual. And maybe as I get older, I might obtain more. But a lot of that had to do with bad choices that I made that influenced my life and nothing to do with the outside world. Remember from the Hidden Tribes study that I talked about the other day, that 8% of that like progressive leftist activist type, like something like 90% of them believed that they had no control over their lives, that the outside world exerted all the forces on them. Yesterday, I talked about cognitive behavioral therapy. That's one of the first things they'll address in cognitive behavioral therapy, that you have to own responsibility for yourself and that the outside world actually cannot cause that much force upon you. The idea of the locus of control, if you would. Something like 90% of things in your life are actually in your control. But this is the difference between logos and pathos, right? These are people, again, who haven't developed their souls. They're all persona. So here, socialism and communism. Communism is at once a complex system of the proletarian ideology and a new social system. It is different from any other ideological and social system, and it is the most complete, progressive, revolutionary, and rational system in human history. It is none of those things. Like, literally, it is none of those things. It has been tried before in the past, numerous times. It is actually where we came from. It is literally basic tribal living. You may have a few personal possessions, right? But when you live in a tribal society, study your anthropology, people. Those people are communists. They have to be to survive. I love to bring up the Israeli kibbutz. The kibbutz, when Israel first came about as a nation, they were all communistic, socialistic. They shared everything. As Israel basically developed its economy some, and there were jobs and people got money, they moved out of the kibbutz. Why? Because that is the natural evolution of things. Marx got it backwards. The division of labor is the natural economic evolution of society. Before that, there was no division of labor. Everyone shared labor. And that's what people want to bring us back to. They have this Rousseauian notion of the noble savage. They aren't noble savages, people. You get the Lord of the Flies. We are seeing that today in our streets. And if you don't have Lord of the Flies, then you have an authoritarian dictator come in, such as Mao. And he will take care of you at the point of a gun. So let's read a little bit more. The ideological and social system of feudalism has a place only in the Museum of History. Now, China came out of feudalism. They didn't really have a capitalistic period per se. The ideological and social system of capitalism has also become a museum piece in one part of the world, the Soviet Union. While in other countries, it resembles a dying person who is sinking fast like the sun setting behind the western hills. So this is interesting. And I don't mean that they didn't have a free trade. All societies have always had free trade, right? But they didn't have they didn't have a developed capitalistic system as much as they did have a sort of feudalism. So socialistic systems will eventually replace the capitalistic system. This is an objective law independent of man's will. No, it's not. Again, as I said, Marx got that backwards. He absolutely got that backwards. However, much of the reactionaries try to hold back the wheel of history. Sooner or later, revolution will take place and it will inevitably triumph. So here's a question. Feudalism in some way, shape, or form was communistic and socialistic in its own right. And it really was. It just had a religious impetus above it. Versus communism has the state as the religion. But before that, people were tribal. Okay, if capitalism was the position that we started from and we moved into communism, why are tribal societies not capitalistic societies? They are fighting for resources amongst other tribes, and they have to share the resources in order to grow and expand their own society or to sustain themselves to their progeny. They have to allow their ancestry to continue and to move on. Why were they not capitalistic? Why were they skeptical of outside tribes most often and didn't always trade with them? Do you really believe that communism is something we evolve into? Now, perhaps in a Star Trek post-scarcity society, I don't see that ever happening, but perhaps in that. But that's not communism either. That's just post-scarcity. So let's understand the backwards thinking of all of this. It says the socialist system will eventually replace capitalism, and then reactionaries stop it. We communists never conceal our political views. Definitely and beyond all doubt, our future or maximum program is to carry China forward to its socialism and communism, both in the name of the party of our Marxist world outlook, unequivocally point to the supreme ideal of the future, a future in comparable brightness and splendor. Taken as a whole, the Chinese revolutionary movement led by the Communist Party embraces the two stages, the democratic and the socialist revolution, which are two essentially different revolutionary processes. The second process can be carried through only after the first has been completed. The democratic revolution is the necessary preparation for the socialist revolution, and the socialist revolution is the inevitable consequence of democratic revolution. I'm a democratic socialist. It's not the same thing. Democratic socialist. Okay, Bernie. Okay. Sorry, guys. I dropped my mouse there. Doing my Bernie impression. Like, get out of here. Get out of here. That works on dumb people. That works on people who don't read. That works on people who just emote, like I said, who don't think. This is interesting. The ruthless economic exploitation and political oppression of the peasants by the landlord class forced them to numerous uprisings. Well, here's an interesting thing. Did you know that China was an ethno-state? That the Han Chinese rule the Communist Party, and there are hundreds, maybe thousands of different ethnic groups within China. By the way, it says Han chauvinism. If you aren't aware, chauvinism essentially just means patriotism. It's synonymous with that. It doesn't mean you're a bigot or anything else. And there's nothing wrong with being a patriot. Patriot comes from Latin pater, and that is like the father, and so it's love for the fatherland, and again the culture and the rules of that nation. So, Han chauvinism is a term coined by Mao Zedong on March 16th, 1953. It criticizes ethnocentrism among the majority Han people of China, and a party directive drafted from the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party titled Criticize Han Chauvinism. Mao said, in some places, the relationships between nationalities are far from normal. For communists, this is an intolerable solution. We must go to the root and criticize the Han chauvinist ideas which exist in a serious degree among the party members and cadres. Now, you have to understand that the Han Chinese ruled China through an empire for a very long time. So Mao had to essentially berate them. But who has control now? Who runs the party? Well, the Hans do. The PRC notions of Han chauvinism in China as a multicultural state has been subjected to criticism mainly from the Western media. One critical view is that the Han Chinese are less homogenous than official policy recognize. Zagdong Mizu has been criticized as an invention of the 20th century and was adopted by the Communist Party only to criticize of the failures of the rival of the Kuomintang, which officially promoted them as part of the nationalist ideology. Anyways, you can read more on that if you wish. I'm going to show you just a few more things very quickly. This is from foreignpolicy.com. It says the Chinese Communist Party wants a Han baby boom that isn't coming. June 2020. Interesting. Why would they want a Han baby boom? Probably in order to, express their ethnic superiority. So here's a short article on Chinese nationalism. In both mainland China and Taiwan, which asserts that Chinese people are a nation and promotes the culture and national unity of all Chinese people. It is significantly different from Han nationalism. It says the Han Chinese people who deem themselves superior to other existing ethnicities, typically minorities in China. And then it goes into the history of this and whatever else. But again, the Hans run China. So, just chapter 4, I'm just going to read a little bit here. The correct handling of contradictions among the people. We are confronted by two types of social contradictions, those between ourselves and the enemy, and those among the people themselves. The two are totally different in nature. The enemy. Who is the enemy? To understand these two different types of contradictions correctly, we must first be clear on what it means by the people and what is meant by the enemy. At the present stage, the period of building socialism, and classes, strata, and social groups which favor, support, and work for the cause of socialist construction all come within the category of the people. So anybody who is for socialism, for the communist dream, for that utopia, those are the people. While the social forces and groups which resist the social revolution are hostile or sabotage socialist constructions are the enemy of the people. So those who would stop this are the enemy of the people. And he talks about contradictions within intellectia and so forth. Again, you can go read this yourself, people. Educate yourself. Really, get out there. Start reading. Start understanding what is going on in the world. Quit being oblivious. Quit listening to propaganda media. Become a developed human being. Understand your enemies. So, this is one way to get rid of your enemies, by the way. I wanted to bring this up as just showing how this centralized planning often fails. This has happened time and again. It happened to the Ukrainians because of the kulaks, who were peasants who had just gained a little bit of land. So before that, they were slaves. We get our word Slav, we get the word slave in English from the word Slav because Slavic peoples were highly prized as slave all throughout the Middle Ages and probably before that. This is little recognized history because we have to racialize everything, or we don't. The left does, the progressives, the communists does, to divide everything. So we have to say that blacks were the most ill-treated slaves ever. Well, I can read you writings about how Slavs sometimes did not make it on their journeys to distant parts of the world. There is also the hidden fact of the Muslim slave trade and the Jewish slave trade. But, it's all just white men, and all white men are evil, right? No, I'm afraid not. In any case, so this is the Great Chinese Famine. 3 years of Great Famine. It is regarded as the deadliest famine and one of the greatest man-made disasters in human histories, with the estimated death toll due to starvation in the tens of millions, about 45 million. Major contributing factor in the famine were the policies of the Great Leap. That was all Mao. In addition to some natural disasters such as droughts, which took place during the period. Natural disasters will always happen, people. That's not just a policy issue. Policies can make them worse. For instance, Hurricane Katrina was made worse as New Orleans ignored its levee system for decades. This is why we need to repair our infrastructure in the United States, or at least a reason. So it goes on. It says, formerly attributed the famine to 30% of natural disaster and 70% of man-made errors after the launch of the reforms of opening up in the Communist Party of China, officially stated in June 1981 that the famine was mainly due to the mistakes of the Great Leap Forward, as well as the anti-rightist campaign, in addition to some natural disasters. Now, the anti-rightist campaign was that opposition. So here we're going to look at the death toll very quickly. Here's a little chart about the Great Leap Forward. Let me bring that up. So we have the death rate versus the birth rate. And so we have a huge spike in the birth rate, and then that one-child policy to flatten that out. If you all recall that they had in place forever. And now China has a problem because of that policy. This is the unintended consequences, because traditionally the Chinese want boys, or they respect boys more. Now, if they didn't care, they would have girls as well. But because they did care, because it was a traditional thing, a traditional ideal that is centuries old, they now have far more boys than they do women, which means their population will drop off even more in the near future, because you can have one dude and 1 million women, and you can repopulate the earth that way. But you can't have 1 million dudes and 1 woman. It's just the way it works. It's biology. It's also why, biologically speaking, women are more highly valued than men. And I know that blows feminists' mind, but it is the reality. Women have a higher biological value than men. That's why women and children are first. That's why you have twice as many female ancestors than you do male ancestors. Men have always been expended. They've always been expendable. They've always gone to war. They've always not necessarily married unless they were of a certain prestige. You have to understand this. You really do. Because the narrative from the commies is that the men are all evil, especially those white men. And they have to flip everything upside down to make everything better. And it's just not true. Anyways, back to this. Due to the lack of food and incentives to marry at that time, according to China's official statistics, China's population in 1961 was about 658 million. Some 14 million less than the population in 1959. Birth rates decreased, yada, yada, yada. It goes on. It says the famine victims somewhere between 20 to 55 million. Here it talks about, I just wanted to bring this up. I wanted to highlight this. Cannibalism. Here it talks about the similar experiences and well, no, it's a whole different thing. With famine deaths rather than people who were born due to declining birth rates. Patnick concluded that the figures were ideologically driven in an attempt to discredit communism, while similar excessive deaths in 1990 Russia followed the collapse of the Soviet Union. Yeah, so it's a Marxist apologist, an Indian Marxist economist. Yeah, that makes sense. Anyways, it says here that cannibalism was widespread. Now, this happens. This also happened in the Ukraine. If you want to go all the way back to the siege of Jerusalem by the Romans, this was happening. This happens when people essentially starve. It is one of my worries about this shutdown of the coup with these radical Marxists in the streets. Fortunately, I think they're a smaller force than they actually are. If only that insane party, that Democratic Party, would actually work with the president and allow things to happen, to quell this nonsense, to arrest these people, to keep them in jail. So here's an older article from the New York Times. This is from 2010, so it's not super old. But it says the worst catastrophe in China's history, and one of the worst anywhere, was the Great Famine in 1958 and 1962. And this just goes down during the Great Leap Forward and gets into all of the details if you want to check this out. Now, it's an opinion. It says historians have known for some time that the Great Leap Forward resulted in one of the world's worst famines. Demographics have used official census figures to estimate that 20 to 30 million people have died. But inside the archives is an abundance of evidence from the minutes of emergency committees to secret police reports and public security investigations that show these estimates to be woefully inaccurate. So it goes through this. It says informing him that 10 million people had died in this province and so forth. So in all, the records I studied suggest that the Great Leap Forward was responsible for at least 45 million deaths. So again, we talked about propaganda, and that's what this is right here. This guy's a Marxist, so therefore he must downplay the figure when it's actually higher than what it was. They do it all the time, and then you get things like this. Official documents come up. I did have another article from The Guardian. I scrapped it because it just says the same thing. It's more recent, but it is from a researcher. It actually may be from, no, it's not from the same gentleman, but or maybe it is. Maybe it is. I forget, but I scrapped it because, time. War and Peace. War is the highest form of struggle for resolving contradictions when they have developed in a certain stage between classes, nations, state, and political groups. And it has existed ever since the emergence of private property of the classes. So if there's no private property, there'll never be war, just like in Chaz. No one was ever shot or killed. No one was ever assaulted. War is a continuation of politics. Sorry, guys. If you read the Doctrines of Fascism, this is like straight out of Mussolini's mouth. Like, these ideologies are so much the same. So much the same. And Mao basically talks about how war kind of develops the character. When politics develops in a certain stage beyond which it cannot proceed, by the usual means, war breaks out and is swept into obstacles from many ways. When the obstacles is removed, our political attain, the war will stop. History has shown that wars are divided into two kinds, just and unjust. All wars that are progressive are just. Mussolini would say the same thing. Absolutely. And you need to understand this. All wars that are progressive are just. This is what BLM and Antifa are talking about. This is what the radical Bernie Sanders supporters are talking about. I mean, not that Bernie Sanders isn't a crazy radical himself, because he is. The millionaires and the billionaires. And now it's just the billionaires, because now I'm a millionaire, so you can't tax me. Can't take my money. Democratic socialism. Yeah, okay. Okay, Burns. Sorry, just a little funny thing. I just thought of there was a meme going around back in the 2016 or 2012 election, whatever it was. I guess it was 2016. Bernie talking about, coffee's hot bean juice. Just stupid stuff like that. It's like, I could see Bernie saying that crazy stuff. Anyways, if you took this, if I copy and pasted, maybe I'll do this sometime. Maybe I'll get a PowerPoint set up. That takes more of my time than sometimes I have in the day to do, which is why I'm trying to just use articles for you all. But if I were to juxtapose these two, you would look at them and be like, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is that fascists don't believe that materialism is the problem of all humanity throughout society, history, and time. Like, they don't think that the struggle between the class warfare is the only thing that has been an issue throughout time. The other thing is that the fascists do allow for religion as long as you hold the state as the ultimate authority, which is weird, but they work within religion. They actually like that. So let's read just a little bit more of this. And all wars that impede progress are unjust. So, but by whose definition? We communists oppose all unjust wars that impede progress. Progress, by the way, by making you poor and tearing everything down. But we do not oppose progress, just wars. Not only do we communists not oppose just wars, they don't oppose just wars, we actively participate in them. As for unjust wars, World War I is an instance in which both sides fought for imperialistic interests. Therefore, the communists of the whole world firmly oppose that war. The way to oppose a war of this kind is to do everything possible to prevent it before it breaks out. And once it breaks out, to oppose war with war. You don't oppose with war. You're just at war. But this gets into that double think, right? That double speak. War is peace. It's like we changed our Department of War to the Department of Defense in the United States some years ago. The War Department was the War Department. It was direct. And then they switched on you because they started to understand how to control your mind better. And they said, oh, it's the Department of Defense. Now let's go bomb some Middle Eastern countries. Let's go over to Vietnam and South Korea. Fight those North Koreans. Fight communism. Let's go to South America and implement our drug war. All that stuff, man. Just insanity. Insanity is stuff that we do. We need to mind our business and make ourselves strong for at least a time. We need to get away from this stuff, and our country's going to, and it is in very deep danger right now of falling apart. And I know, like 60 years ago or so, we were sort of in a similar position, but there were far more conservative people out there, and the media wasn't as propagandistic, and they weren't pushing Marxism as much. It's very different. So the People's War. What is a true bastion of iron? It is the masses, the millions upon millions of people who genuinely, sincerely support the revolution. That is the real Iron Bastion, which is impossible and absolutely impossible for any force on earth to smash. The crowd goes wild as the revolutionaries are stirred up in their emotions, not realizing that they will probably die. The People's Army. Again, whatever. I'm going to go through this. Leadership of the party committees. Now, again, you go read this for yourself, but he basically says, when they have issues, members of the party committee maintain only formal, not real, unity among themselves. The situation must be changed. From now on, a sound system of party committee meetings must be instituted in all leading bodies, from the regional bureaus to the central committee to the prefectural party committees. And where was it? Or maybe it's further down, but he talks about, if they disagree, well, they can disagree and they have to sort that out. And it's just silly. This is from Business Insider. And this is what happens when you disagree with the Communist Party. Barging into your home, threatening your family, or making you disappear. Here's what China does with people who speak out against them. And Winnie the Pooh there, Xi Jinping, Winnie the Pooh is banned in China right now because of him, because he resembles him and he doesn't like being made fun of. I mean, can you get any more totalitarian, dictatorial than that? Authoritarian? The Chinese Communist Party has long sought to suppress ideas that could undermine the sweeping authority. It has over 1.4 billion citizens, and the state can go to extreme lengths to maintain its grip. Now, I will say this: in the some of the extended provinces is not as totalitarian. In the more countryside, the poor rural areas, they're a little bit more open. They let the prefects of those areas kind of like control them, at least from what I understand. But make no mistake, you talk about the party wrong. Look, I mean, we know what happened to the scientist that leaked the virus out from Wuhan. He disappeared, and then he died of the virus apparently, or so they say. So, anyways, this is kind of like basic: make you disappear, give some examples, physically drag you away so you can't speak to the media. This happened to sort of a media crew had some of their film, I think, confiscated because they were talking to people about Tiananmen Square. Most people under the age of 30 do not know that there was a protest in Tiananmen Square and that the Communist Party in China slaughtered its own people in the streets. Now, I want these rioters and these arsonists and these looters to be suppressed, but I don't want them killed. No, if they're being violent and attacking people, such as in Kenosha, that may happen. It's unfortunate, but I don't want them disappearing either. I want them properly controlled, and I want proper consequences so people understand they can't do these things, that we're going to have law and order. Put your family under house arrest, even if they haven't been accused of a crime. Does any of this sound familiar, by the way, of things that go into, that happen in the United States? House arrest? Like, we might not do that per se, but look at people who, there have been recent incidences of people whose family have been gone after. Their very own mothers have been fired from jobs from something that they've said, as if their mother shares the same opinion, as if they're not their own autonomous person. See, this is the problem with collectivism, people. This is the problem with having just a purely collective Borg-like mind. That NPC mind. Orange man bad. Orange man bad. That idea, that politically correct ideal is to control your mind. This is what I covered yesterday. This is what Orwell wrote about. And they'll go after everyone that they can. Threaten to kill your family and forbid them from leaving China. And guys, go back and read this. These are all examples. These are personal accounts. Take down your social media post. Well, we do that here, don't we? We just let big tech do it. Remove your posts from the internet and reportedly throw you in a psychiatric ward. There's also the Uyghur camps. Excuse me. Barge into your house to force you off the airwaves. Trap you in your house and detain people who come to see you. Forbid you from leaving the country. Intercept your protests before they even begin. Let's watch this real quick. Nope, don't want to play. Never mind. So, anyways, here is a specific example of, this is from South China Morning Post. This is Chairman Mao, the man behind the Little Red Book and warnings for China, turbulent past for Hong Kong's future. Now, importantly, this was written last April, I believe, before the gross intrusion of the government upon the free people of Hong Kong. And by the way, they wave our flag in America because they see American freedom as the pinnacle and height of freedom. And we have fools and idiots in the streets and politicians that back them up and a media that cover for them that want to erode that freedom. You are despicable. And honestly, some of you I'd like to meet to your, not that I would yell at you, but just be like, you're a gross, disgusting person. Not because I'm cruel or mean. I don't want to stir up trouble, but it's just like, it's like that rage. It's like, how can you be this horrible? Like I said, what Jesus said to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, you hypocrites, you actors, you fakes, you phonies. So, Tang Yemin, son of former People's Daily reporter editor Tang Pingzhu at the Chinese University of Shatin, Chinese writer Tang Mingyan, 65, still recalls the chants of China's Red Guards as they humiliated his father during the Cultural Revolution, the decade of political turmoil that started in 1966. He remembers hearing, "You dog of the Tangs, the Little Red Book can reveal the demon like a magic mirror, and there's no way you can flee." That Little Red Book's important to China. That's why I brought up this article here, how they have gone to revamp it. Ironically, it was the senior Tang who had struck on the idea to produce an easy-to-read collection of Chairman Mao Zedong's sayings, which the youthful Red Guards wielded as they abused and humiliated those deemed to be political or class enemies. Everyone not in line with the party, that is. Mao initiated the Cultural Revolution to assert control over the Communist Party, attacking elitism by targeting intellectuals, scholars, cultural figures, and those accused of clinging to traditional ways. Anything in their way, they will destroy. If any of this sounds familiar, from the last 8 years or so of the internet culture talking about feminism, patriarchy, intersectionalism, only whites can be racist. No, and I reject your racism against my European heritage. The Little Red Book, officially titled Quotations from Chairman Mao, was a collection of more than 400 aphorisms on everything from class struggle to revolution and power. It was a political weapon used against millions in the chaos and turmoil of the Cultural Revolution that did not end until his death in 1976. Tang Pingzhu steered the project to produce the pocket-sized book with its instinctive red plastic cover, while he was a founding member and deputy editor-in-chief of the Chinese military mouthpiece, PLA Daily. 5 decades on, his song, Tang Yaming has written a book on the history of the Little Red Book, detailing its making and power and struggles in the Maoist era, suffering of his family endured during the turbulent decade. So, the main reason why I brought this in was to just show you, once again, essentially the author of this book that is like the communist Chinese Bible. And by the way, I got from Marxist.org. Let's go there real quick. The Marxist Library. You can get everything you ever want here about Marxism. In any case, he helped to create this book of the sayings that became their Bible, their secular Bible. Saul Alinsky is sort of that today, an abbreviated version for the Democrats. Now, those rules for radicals are constantly used. The Little Red Book is constantly used. Much of the teachings of Marx, of course, is constantly used. People will say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? My general opinion, you're an idiot and you want to return to a tribal society that has pretty much no technology. Because without division of labor, you're not going to develop technology. This is just an anthropological fact. We see this as societies developed at different times. And interestingly enough, as they developed at different times, they basically develop in the same manner. There might be some slight differences based on cultural habits and language and whatnot. Geography also to some extent. Religion, of course. But generally speaking, the progression of human society, the evolution of human society is the same cross-culturally, globally. And the communists just don't understand this. They don't understand that they want to go backwards. So as Maji Nawaz would say, or Dave Rubin, they are the regressives. They are retrogrades. In any case, folks, it's time for me to get off here. I have a live show to do here in a little bit. So with that, if you like this content, like, share, subscribe. This has been AllMinucOne. My name is Bill, and you all, please, please be well.